So what happens when an economy just breaks, when everything grinds to a halt? Well, it turns out there's a kind of emergency manual that governments reach for, a playbook for pulling a nation out of a complete nosedive. Today, we're going to flip through the pages of one of the most influential and controversial playbooks ever written, the Keynesian Guide to Fixing a Broken Economy. Let's get into it. To really get why this playbook even exists, let's just rewind to the chaos of the Great Recession. It's October 2009, and the damage is just staggering. We're talking 15.4 million Americans officially out of work.
And it's not just individuals. The very backbone of the economy is cracking. 170,000 small businesses, gone, forced to shut their doors for good. And for everybody else, well, people are scared. They're clutching their wallets. Household spending, the main engine of the U.S. economy, has absolutely plummeted by nearly 8%.
Look, these aren't just numbers on a screen. They're millions of lives, millions of livelihoods just completely turned upside down. And it forces us to ask two really fundamental questions. Why do modern economies crash so spectacularly? And is there anything we can actually do to fix them when they do?
For a long time, the common wisdom was that economies were basically self-correcting. Yeah, they might get tossed around in a storm, but they'd always find their way back. The Great Depression just shattered that idea. It proved that an economy can get stuck, really badly stuck. Think about it for a second. Back in 1933, the factories hadn't vanished. The workers were still there, ready and willing to work. The country's ability to supply goods was totally fine. So, what went wrong? The massive insight was that the problem wasn't the ability to make things, it was that nobody was buying things. The problem wasn't supply, it was a total collapse in demand.
And this is where the British economist John Maynard Keynes really enters the story. He's watching the entire global economy crumble, and he comes forward with this radical new theory, one that would completely rewrite the rules and give governments a brand new role to play.
Keynes pointed out this incredibly dangerous trap he called a recessionary gap. It's basically the idea of a bad equilibrium. The economy finds a stable point, but it's a terrible one, where millions of people are unemployed and factories are just sitting idle. The economy is stuck, and he argued that without a major jolt, it could stay stuck for years.
Okay, so if the problem is a serious lack of demand, the solution has got to be to increase it, right? But to do that, you first have to understand what makes up the economic engine in the first place. Keynes broke down what we call aggregate, or total demand, into four key parts.
And here they are: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Now, this chart shows them as equal pieces of the pie just for simplicity's sake. But in the real world, one of these is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the economy. Let's break them down really quick.
First up, and by far the biggest piece, is consumption. That's you. That's me. That's all of us, buying stuff. It's all about how much money we have left after taxes and, maybe more importantly, how confident we feel about the future.
Next up is investment. Now, this is spending by businesses. Think new factories, new equipment, that kind of thing. This part is the most volatile, the most jumpy, because it's all based on a guess about what future profits might look like. When businesses get nervous, investment spending just disappears.
Then we have government spending. This covers the whole shebang: roads, schools, military, you name it. And unlike the other components, this one is a direct lever that policymakers can literally pull to try and steer the economy.
And finally, there are net exports. This one's pretty simple. It's just the value of everything a country sells to the world minus everything it buys from the world.
So this brings up a really important question. If demand falls off a cliff, why don't prices and wages just fall with it to get things moving again? Why doesn't the system just fix itself? Well, Keynes's big answer was that in the real world, prices and wages are sticky. They just don't like to go down. And you can really see the heart of the problem here. On one side, you have the ideal theory: demand falls, so prices and wages fall, and the economy bounces back pretty quickly. But the Keynesian reality is that prices and wages get stuck. And when they can't adjust downward, the only thing left to give is jobs. That's when a recession gets really deep. And there are a few pretty common sense reasons for this. First, there's the coordination problem. Would you take a pay cut if you weren't sure all your coworkers would too? Probably not. Then there are menu costs, the literal cost for a restaurant or a store to change all its prices. And finally, companies just don't want to tick off their customers by changing prices all the time. All right, so if the economy is stuck in this low demand trap and sticky prices aren't going to solve the problem, who can? Well, for Keynes, the answer was crystal clear.
The only player big enough and powerful enough to jolt the whole system back to life is the government.
Now, the most powerful tool in this whole Keynesian playbook is something called the expenditure multiplier. Here's how it works. Let's say the government spends $100 on a new project. That $100 immediately becomes income for the workers and the suppliers on that project. Then they go out and spend a chunk of that new income. That spending then becomes income for somebody else, who then spends a chunk of their new income, and on it goes. That initial $100 actually ripples through the economy, creating a total impact that's way bigger than the original amount.
Keynes was so focused on just getting spending going again that he made this famous, slightly outrageous statement. Now, obviously, his point wasn't that we should literally bury cash. It was that in a really deep depression, the simple act of spending and creating income is way more important than what the money is actually spent on.
Now, this playbook seems pretty powerful, doesn't it? Just pump up demand and boom, unemployment fixed. But of course, it's not that simple. As policymakers started actually using these tools, they ran into a pretty significant complication.
Back in the 1950s and 60s, economists noticed this relationship they called the Phillips curve. It basically suggested there was a stable trade-off. A country could choose to have lower unemployment, but it would have to accept a little more inflation. Or it could have lower inflation, but with higher unemployment. It was like a policy menu you could order from.
But then, the 1970s happened, and the menu broke. The global economy got hit with a shock that asked a question the original playbook just had no answer for. What in the world do you do when you get the worst of both worlds? The answer was a grim new word, stagflation. It was kicked off by supply shocks, like the big oil crisis, that drove prices sky high while also crippling production. And it showed that an approach focused only on demand just wasn't enough.
All of this forced modern Keynesian policy to grow up a bit. It's no longer just about hitting the gas pedal. The goal now is this really delicate balancing act. You're trying to manage total demand to find that Goldilocks level. Not too hot to cause inflation, not too cold to cause unemployment, but just right.
Which leaves us with one last, really critical question. We've had this playbook in one form or another for almost a century now. Policymakers used its ideas to fight the 2008 recession and again during the COVID downturn. So, if we have the instructions, why are these crises still so incredibly difficult and painful to manage? The debate over how much to intervene, how fast, and what the long-term side effects are, well, that's a chapter that's still being written.